Hello and welcome to Contramundum. I am Andrew Isker, and with me is CJ Engel as always. And today we will be talking about the Gaza protests on college campuses. We talked about it a little bit on the other day with Ron Dodson. We'll pick right back up where we left off with these things and get CJ's input on it. But these protests are still raging, and today we got to see, if you're online at all, you get to see Frat Boys enter the fray, and that's a lot of fun. So, CJ, everyone's dying to know, what do you think about the goings on this week?
I think it's a clash between two interest groups, none of whom are interested in what's good for Heritage America. So I think we talked about this in the beginning, is that like we're kind of picking an ally that's more similar to our way of doing things, but neither of them have the best interests of Heritage America in mind. I think it's like this, pro-Zionist Israel lobby versus the Palestinian third worldist mentality.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going on. And you can see in Congress and the Senate, they just passed the anti-free speech bill. And, that's obviously the pro-Zionism coming out. And then the opposition to the pro-Zionism position is the third worldist position. And there are very few, they have no power, people like Thomas Massey or Paul Gosar, or, people like that, Matt Gaetz, who have, there's a couple others, but they don't really have any like actual power. They just have Twitter and some of those things too. But you're seeing the clash of group interests. And there's only one group in America known as The Unprotected Class by Jeremy Carl. Great book. We're going to have him on soon. Oh, did we have him on? No,
you had him on Chronicles.
Yeah, we're going to have him on.
We haven't had him on yet.
Yeah. We're going to get him on. But yeah, who's looking out for Heritage America? Who's looking out for, what one of our listeners calls Anglo-Protestants? But I think that is an important aspect to what's going on too, is the fact that there are groups out there that are interested in wielding power against their enemies, and we don't have anybody to do that on behalf of us. But whenever we speak up and advocate that, we get scolded by those who, basically function to communicate regime narratives back to us and to hold us at bay, like Russell Moore and others like that. So I think Heritage Americans need to pay attention to these group dynamics and participate in the coming decades.
Yeah, I mean, what do you think about, for instance, the response? Like today, you have just this. Maybe it was yesterday, the video came out today of at Ole Miss, University of Mississippi. There are all these young dudes waving American flags, and they called the fat black protester Lizzo, which is a brilliant insult, because you can't explain, like, she's this like affirmative action star, right? Where here's this big fat black woman who everyone says you have to call her beautiful. And so if you call her that, they can't complain, because it's like, well, I've been calling her beautiful the whole time. What do you mean? That's not an insult, right? But they know it is. Yeah. And anyway, it was hilarious to see these videos and the confrontation of these people, because these guys, they're not, especially this one at Ole Miss, they're not waving Israeli flags and saying we care so much about Israel. Like, they just see these repulsive, bio-Leninists in front of them, and they don't like them, and they're mocking them and verbally attacking them, and having a lot of fun doing it, by the way.
Yeah.
And you see that's the third group. The one group that is not represented at all is actual Americans.
Yeah. I have this essay that I've been talking to Timon about getting on American Reformer, but I haven't quite finished it yet. But it's literally about that. It's like this. This book, Revolution from the Middle. It's by Sam Francis, if we're allowed to say his name, but Revolution from the Middle. It's just this call to, it's not middle class America, but basically heritage Americans, like legacy Americans, those
middle American radicals. That's the term you used, isn't it?
That's MARs, the Mars. But yeah, I'm going to talk about this, but this is exactly what Sam Francis and Pat Buchanan appealed to in the 1990s. And it's exactly the strategy that the right needs to have right now. This is our moment, because we have no one in power, and we need a right-wing insurgency based around the American flag, based around these older symbols of American life that have nothing to do with the radical left or Zionist occupied government.
Yeah, and that is right when you think about it, right? That's what you're seeing there. Even the one where was it at UNC, maybe the one where the young guys are like protecting the American flag, and people, there are people losing their minds over because there's a kid off in the corner that has like an Israeli flag, and they're like, "Oh, see, these are pro Zionist guys," and it's like, no, like that guy, he's holding the flag he cares about, which is Israel. He's not holding the American flag, protecting it from these people, right? It These guys, they're largely apolitical, right? They
Mhm.
don't dog in this fight at
Well,
all.
that's what we have to do is appeal to their instincts. Like,
Yeah,
these young white guys, that I basically, they you say what you want about them. They realize that they don't identify with the Israeli flag or the gay
yeah,
flag, and people need symbols to rally around. Symbols are
yeah,
important. Symbols run the world, and so yeah, you need. I mean, these are instincts, and we
yeah,
need to appeal to them, and we need to foster them.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you look at the Ole Miss, counter protests, and it's all American flags everywhere, and like Trump
Mhm,
flags. So basically, like a Trump rally
mhm.
is what it is, and it's beautiful, right? You love to see it, right? They're responding to these people because they're horrible, awful, repulsive people. This is just BLM wrapped in kafaya or whatever you call those dumb Muslim things, right?
Mhm.
That's what it is, right? It's the exact same, and this is what we talked about last time, or Ron Dodson and I talked about last time, is that it's just BLM, right? It's just we hate white people, we hate, and yeah, someone in the comments, already said, because that was the replies we were getting when it hit the algorithm, and I guess a bunch of lefties found the stream. Is all of these people at the protests are white? How can you say they hate white people? It's like you've never met a lib before. Like they're self-hating white people. That's what they are,
Yeah.
and but they're denouncing whiteness as a group, and these guys see that. They see that they're hated. They see that they're despised. I put out a tweet this morning, and it's interesting, like looking at this conflict, the three blocks of this conflict, and they all correspond with factions within evangelicalism, right? You have woke evangelicals, right? Like, I mean, what's that fat dude, bald with a beard, that always puts out the dumbest tweets? And
You have to
he's
be
in
more
Austin.
specific.
Sorry, yeah. Oh, what's his name? I can't think of
No,
it.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
You know the guy I'm talking about, though, right?
Yeah.
And there's a few of them, right? They're always putting out these really obnoxious, stupid tweets, trying to bait us into engaging them, and like, and those are the people. They are on the side of BLM. They're on the side of Hamas and Palestinians. Eric Erickson, no, it's not him. And they're on the other side of all of these guys, right? They want them in their church. They want gays and trannies and everything in their church, right? That's what they want. And uh, and so that's one faction of the conflict, the BLM Marxist leftoid faction. That's what woke evangelicals want. But then you have Big Eva, and you see like the ERLC, um, it was appealing to pass the hate speech law, the anti-Semitism
Mhm.
law. Um, and Dan Darling is tweeting about it, and uh all of these guys, we need to stop this. This is so bad. We care about the Jews so much, and the SBC has a great relationship with Israel, and blah blah blah. Right? They want to appeal to the Israel lobby in the United States because that's respectable. And even though the Israel lobby is awful, it's responsible for all of the American foreign policy in the Middle East over the last 40 years, longer than that, even 50 years. And it's very, very bloody and evil, but you don't see it, right? You don't. None of the blood is on their hands. Literally, they don't. Nobody sees the destruction that brings.
Mhm.
Um, but it's very respectable, right? That's the respectable thing to do, is say, "Oh, we oppose anti-Semitism. Oh, we should pass this bill," right? So that's who they appeal to, and the group that nobody in evangelicalism cares about are the guys that you see in those videos, right? The
Yeah.
frat boys waving the American flags. They don't care about them at all, right? And actually, they don't want them in their churches. Could you imagine, JD Greer having, or having guys like that come into his church, right? These frat boys that want to chug beer and act all crazy.
Yeah.
They don't want anything to do with guys like that, especially because, well, they're toxically masculine, they're white, they're bad. We don't want guys like that. And if they did bring them in, they'd immediately neuter them, right?
Yeah.
That's what they would do.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, those are exactly the guys I want, and there's so many of them. That's the thing, and that's the point that Sam Francis made, and Pat Buchanan made decades ago now. That these are the people nobody cares about. That you could bash them and call them all sorts of horrible stuff all day long, and no one will say boo about that.
Yeah.
And yet all of these guys are going to go have jobs and productive lives and be contributors to their communities and their society at large. They're going to get married, have families, have kids, right? These are, people call them like the barstool sports Americans, right? Like these guys are this massive swath in American society that the church wants nothing to do with whatsoever, right? One guy, it's interesting, like one guy that could have appealed to them in his heyday is a guy like Mark Driscoll, and you see how they drive guys like that out. They don't want guys like that appeal to those kind of guys. No, we got to get rid of them. And so anyway, I look at it along those lines. Like the stuff that we're doing, the audience that we have with this show, like these are the guys we want to appeal to. These are the guys we want to have our guys listening to this show around and influencing and leading into the church. And so, right. And so I think most of the people watching us see the videos, see these things, and think of it in frat house versus longhouse terms. And they see them and they're like, that you feel something when you see these young guys. So you feel like, oh, that would be me if I was 22 years old again and on a college campus.
Yeah,
I'd be right there.
It's funny because like dispositionally, I'm not really a frat guy, at all.
What, really?
but like these are the types that the vanguard can appeal to, right?
Yes.
Because these are the ones that make fun of the HR ladies.
Yeah.
These are the ones that like they don't want to be scolded or lectured to about how they're insensitive. In fact, they like to provoke. These and what the establishment needs,
and it's fun.
Provocation. We need provocation right now. We need to call our enemies Lizzo. Like that's part of what we need in this moment. So
and it reminds me a little bit of like the energy that was online in 2016 on Twitter before Twitter really got censored. Is the memes and all of the videos that were made and everything were so funny. They were hilarious. And it's like that same kind of energy, those same kind of guys, right? It's provocative and it's frat boys are a threat to the establishment because they're nearly unlonghouseable. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Like these guys,
we live in Lizzo occupied government, and you need these guys to oppose it. So
we have to oppose the log.
Yes.
But that's exactly it. And so I see that it makes me happy, even though some guys are like, whoa, no, they're by opposing the Hamas protesters, they're implicitly taking the side of Zionism and the regime. And it's like, well, maybe in one sense, yeah. But on the other hand, remember who these people are. This is BLM, right? These are the well-funded, well-organized Marxist radicals that burned down the country 4 years ago. The exact same people. And the issue at hand is Israel, but they don't even care about Israel like we would, right? Mm-hmm. They don't understand the conflict in those terms. They just see it as white versus brown. Mm-hmm. We're going to liberate the brown people from the white people, right? That's how they view this conflict. And you focus it on something else, and they'll start tearing down whatever remaining Confederate statues there are in the country and attacking white people and beating them up, burning down cities, right? That's what these people are. And so I'm cool with them being opposed, even if it ends up serving the interests of the regime, right? Because like you have two enemies here, basically.
That was my point. Yeah.
One is much more dangerous and
Mhm.
destructive,
Mhm.
right? That's how you have to understand it. And send in the, I mean, on one hand, I talked about this too, like 2020, same people are doing all the same stuff. Cops never get sent in. All of their demands are immediately conceded to. This time around, the cops are getting sent in and they're not getting their demands met at all. And what it tells you is what protests or riots are permissible by the regime and what are not.
Mhm.
And this one, they're laying the groundwork where it's like you can be as woke as you want, you could be as have as much anti-white racism as you want, as long as you don't touch Israel. Right?
Mhm.
We're laying down the ground rules here. You can hate white people all day long, but leave Israel out of it. Right?
Mhm.
That's what the regime is saying.
Mhm.
So yes,
Yeah.
Tim Miller, salmon-colored shirts, shorts send a chill up their spine. Yes, they do. Yes, CJ, we should get some salmon colored shorts and just mog the commies. All right.
I'm gonna choke on my Greco gum.
But the other thing we wanted to talk about today, I mean that stuff's really good and fun, and we send power to the young frat boys that are mogging the Lizzos out there. Um, but we wanted to get into more serious, deeper intellectual discussion. And so there was a video, just I think it came out yesterday, of Judge Andrew Napolitano interviewing John Mearsheimer. And so Mearsheimer is, I mean, how would you describe Mearsheimer? I mean, a foreign policy realist, probably the leading expert on international relations, that someone you have to pay attention to, right?
I would describe him as a foreign policy realist.
Yeah.
He's actually sort of left. He's got like a left tinge to his
He's left
political.
liberal. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But that makes him helpful though, because he doesn't. But he doesn't buy into the idealism or the Wilsonianism
Hmm.
or the neoconservatism that has dominated American foreign policy. So I have high respect for his analysis for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. He is, I mean, he wrote the book, along with
The
Stephen
Israel lobby.
Walt, The Israel Lobby.
Yeah,
And, and so he understands this stuff at an extremely deep level. And, Napolitano also, very good. Have you met him before, CJ?
I have not met him. I have mixed feelings on Napolitano. Like sometimes he's got really really bad takes.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, I mean, this will
He
be a good.
does, but
I haven't seen it.
he's
Yeah,
good on this issue, I think.
yeah.
So we will, I'll add this to the screen here and hopefully we don't have any technical issues. All right. So, we'll speed it up a little bit because it's like a 30-minute video. Um, we'll go to 1.5 speed for Judge Knapp, and
He already
away we
talked
go.
fast,
Hi,
right?
everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. Professor John Mearsheimer joins us now. Professor Mearsheimer, always a pleasure. I'm very taken aback, as I expect you are, by the attitude of police and mayors and governors not hesitating to use very, very serious force on student demonstrators in order to squelch the speech that the government.
See, I already disagree with him here. I'm like, I'm not that taken aback by it.
Yeah,
That's okay.
he's
Send in
very
the
much
cops.
he's very much a classical liberal and has
Yeah.
no room for political dynamics.
Yeah. Yeah. He's libertarian.
Mhm,
And these are his principles being played out here.
mhm.
But nevertheless, let's let him keep going.
Hates and fears. And before we get into that, I would like to ask you to help us with a couple of basics. Yesterday, the Congress, or the House of Representatives, passed legislation and sent it over to the Senate, which so broadly defined anti-Semitism that if I were a professor there and said, from the river to the sea, let everyone be free, either I could be disciplined or the school could be disciplined and perhaps lose federal funds. So let's start with some basics. What is anti-Semitism?
Well, the problem in answering that
And Mearsheimer is Jewish, by the way, if you didn't know. So it's getting his take on this question is definitely worthwhile.
question is that because Israel's supporters in the United States accuse anyone who criticizes Israel or criticizes the U.S.-Israeli relationship or criticizes the Israel lobby as an anti-Semite, what we have is a situation where the term has become to some extent meaningless. I mean, I've been called an anti-Semite on numerous occasions since Steve Walt and I wrote the Israel lobby article and then the book. And I believe there's no justification for calling me an anti-Semite. But again, I criticize the lobby in Israel and the U.S.-Israeli relationship. So by definition, I'm an anti-Semite. If you ask me
Oh, Dr. Bob says Mearsheimer is not Jewish. Stephen Walt is Jewish. Maybe I made a mistake. Mea culpa. Sorry, Dr. Mearsheimer. All right.
What is real anti-Semitism? It is where somebody hates Jews because they are Jews and behaves towards them in noxious ways. And I'm fully aware that there are instances of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world more generally. There are anti-Semites in the land. But I think when most people call someone an anti-Semite these days, that's not what they're talking about. They're using the elastic definition to criticize huge numbers of people who are saying things that Israel's supporters don't like.
I mean, it is.
You want to comment on that, CJ? What do you think about
Well, obviously
his
that's
definition?
true. I mean, that's how rhetoric works in the 20th century, 20th and 21st century. So yeah, I mean, that's how racism works. That's how fascist works. I mean, this is like, I mean, everyone recognizes it now. So,
well, and you see this with this bill in particular, where none of these people are in like however you define anti-Semitism, right? If you define it the way Mearsheimer does, as hatred of Jews as Jews, right? That's not why they have these views at all, right? They don't care about Judaism. They don't care about Jews as a class or a group. They're not critical of them as Jews. They're critical of Israel as a European white colonial state, right? That is why the protests are happening, not because we don't like the funny little hats these people wear or something. Like that's not why they have these views. And you can see it in, like, have you read the bill, CJ?
Just the portions that have been posted online.
Okay, yeah, it really is labeling criticism of Israel as this type of speech, as anti-Semitism, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's defining it that way, and it's extremely broad, where you can't criticize Israel at all, right? You can't levy these criticisms, ones that we would, to be able to say.
Have you read the bill?
Yeah, I have.
What are the consequences for it? Like, what is the content?
Well, so it's
or
it's institutional. So I mean, a lot of people, like, they're reading it and they think like they're banning speech, right? Like you and I will go to jail or something if we criticize Israel. That's not what the bill is about.
Mm-hmm.
The bill is about it's an amendment basically to the Civil Rights Act, where
interesting
federal funding that's flowing to universities can be shut off, will be shut off, if they don't discipline professors that say these things, criticize Israel in this way. And so that's the point of it. It's not limiting speech in the broad sense.
This is
right?
This is really important. And I don't mean to get off topic here too much. But this is really important because it indicates how the right can succeed. Because when you create parallel institutions that are not subject to some of these constraints about receiving federal funding or federal grants or federal subsidies or any of these things, there's still freedom to do what we want. We live in a managerial state and everything is downstream from the Washington bureaucratic apparatus. But if you can create parallel institutions, you're still free, because the mechanism by which the state enforces its doctrine is via the departments and the agencies and the bureaucracies. And so there actually is a strategy there that's worth talking about, maybe next time.
Well, no, I think so. That and like the like second order effect of this is they've established the mechanism by which, say Biden wins in November, and say the Senate and the House go to the Democrats, and they have this majority there to do whatever they want. Well, they'll take the same structure of this bill and say, if you employ anyone that says men are men and women are women, and men can't become women and vice versa, or if you employ anyone at your university that says, I'm a Christian, I believe what the Bible says about homosexuality, well, you have to discipline those people and fire them, get rid of them, or you'll lose your federal funding. Right? That's the very, very next thing that they'll do.
We need that.
And it pushes the antithesis.
Without Washington funneling money to us.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely we do. And it will only hasten the creation and growth of parallel institutions. But in the meantime, it's still bad to single out Christians. And that's what they'll do. right, with these things. And anyone who's like cheering it on is absolutely foolish, because they can't see that this is the mechanism that they'll employ against us,
Mhm.
right? And so yeah, I just I don't know, I don't get how people can't see that, you know. But anyway, we'll continue on in the video here.
This basic First Amendment law that the government cannot get involved in evaluating the content of speech, whether your speech is motivated by a disgust over what the IDF is doing in Gaza, or whether your speech is motivated by a hatred for Jews. You have the right to say what you want.
Absolutely, I agree. But I mean, it's just very important to understand what's going on here. The greatest threat to the First Amendment in this country at this point in time is Israel's supporters. It's the Israel lobby. And what's going on here, to dig
Correct.
a layer deeper, is that Israel is doing horrendous things in Gaza, and all sorts of people are talking about it and criticizing Israel. And what the lobby wants to do is shut down that criticism before it goes too far and before too many people recognize exactly what's happening. And the only way they can shut down that criticism is to basically throw the First Amendment out the window. And that's what's happening here.
Does it, without getting too semantic, or at the risk of getting too semantic, does it matter that the Jews are not Semites, or does this phrase anti-Semitism just means hatred for the Jewish people? They're Ashkenazi, they're Eastern European Jews. The Palestinians are the Semites.
Well, I think that you don't want to go down that road. I think that when we talk about anti-Semites or anti-Semitism, we're talking about hatred
for the Jewish people.
Yeah, and I think it's best to keep it that way. And again, I think we want to recognize that there is real anti-Semitism in the land, and that we should combat it. But that's not what's going on here. The idea that these students who are protesting on these various campuses are a bunch of anti-Semites is not a serious argument. Again, that's not to say there might not be one or two anti-Semites in the crowd, but the fact is that a good number of the people in the crowd are Jews themselves, and a good number of the people who've been arrested are Jews. And the idea that Jews are being beaten up in some sort of systematic way because they're Jews is not a serious argument.
There's no serious evidence for that. What is Zionism, Professor Mearsheimer?
Well, Zionism is a commitment to Israel, and it's basically another way of talking about the Jewish state. Zionism is a commitment to having or creating and having a state that represents the Jewish people. If you think about the famous book by Theodor Herzl, who I would call the father of Zionism, about that concept, the book is called The Jewish State. The Jewish state is another way of saying nation state. The nation here are Jews, or the nation is Jews. And so Zionism is all about the Jewish state. And somebody who is a Zionist has a commitment to maintaining Israel, maintaining a Jewish state. My friends who are anti-Zionists don't believe that there should be a Jewish state. They believe that between the river and the sea, there should be a democratic state. And whether it's dominated by Jews or it's dominated by Palestinians is largely irrelevant. They are anti-Zionists. And of course, if you're a Zionist, you don't buy that for 1 second.
Is Israel a democracy?
So you want to comment on that at all, CJ?
Yeah, I don't know as much about the politics of the region. I have my biases toward the pre-1940s, like Anglo-dominated, restructuring of the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
And I do believe that the state of Israel was extremely brutal and unfair and unjust in what it did there. But, I think I've spent a lot of my time focused on what's good for my people. And like over there, I mean, America has not been a good influence over there, and it's sort of been the bully by which Israel can get away with a lot of stuff, and Israel has, to that end, sucked a lot of our resources and wealth and intelligence and weaponry and all of these things. Our the bandwidth of politics has gone over there. So I just can't bring myself to really care a lot. You know what I mean? Like, I'm losing my way of life, and American heritage is being liquidated. I think that's where my heart is.
Yeah, well, yeah, me too. I think, I mean, I'm forced to care about this conflict because the regime that rules over me is subsidizing it.
Yeah.
And on like both sides. It is interesting, what he discusses there, that like the anti-Zionists, they just want to have a one state that's democratic, and obviously Israel would never want that because of demographics, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Palestinians have a lot more babies than they do, and they would quickly be overwhelmed to be a minority in that country. So they're never going to settle for that at all. One of the big players, and I don't think they get into this, but one of the big players here is Turkey, and Erdogan. And did you see this week that they're like shuttering some trade relations with Israel and basically signaling that they want this to stop. Right, they're putting pressure on them. Did you see that at all?
Didn't see that. No.
Yeah, I think the big issue here, and what, as far as like the end game of all of this, is you have all of these Muslim countries with, like Jordan or Saudi Arabia, that are ruled by a kingdom and a very small elite, and they're largely very friendly to Israel. If they're neutral, but they're very, very like, even like when Iran attacked, Jordan was shooting down drones and things like that. But the population of the countries that they rule is very anti-Israel, especially as Palestine, or as the Palestinians are being, women and children being killed in Gaza. And so they could lose their mandate to rule very, very quickly, very easily. And they're always very conscious of coups and the tenuous grasp that they have on power. The same goes with Turkey, right? There are, obviously, it's a Muslim country, and there are factions in there that are much more radical. And even though the Erdogan government is basically Western style liberal democracy, they feel that pressure. And so the thing that will cause all of this to end or collapse, I think, is that all of the Arab states will put pressure on them to bring it to an end. And so anyway, and in the past, the United States has been able to smooth things over and tell all these countries, no, just let them do their thing, right? And that doesn't work as much anymore. I think like Ukraine plays a role into that, where the United States has dumped tens of billions of dollars in Ukraine, and it's accomplished absolutely nothing, right? Yeah. This promise they make to Zelensky, and unfortunately, I'm kind of dressed like him today, but the promise they make to Zelensky, that, you be this client state of ours and it'll go great for you. Well, that hasn't happened at all. It's gone poorly.
Well,
very
it's
poorly.
Obvious that like Ukraine is basically like a last ditch effort to do what they've always done in the Middle East, which is basically just funnel money out and pour it back into their own coffers. I mean, it's a money laundering operation, and that's all it is.
Yeah, well, exactly.
And probably Zelensky and his cronies get a cut, but that's about it.
Oh yeah, they definitely do. Without a doubt. I mean, if he isn't cooed and dealt with by his people by the end of the war, he'll be living in Beverly Hills the rest of his life. And so but all of these nations see this, right? They see what happens when you partner with the United States, that it doesn't ultimately go well for you, that it's you're making a deal with the devil, and it'll go poorly in the end. And so I think the mystique that the United States had, the allure that it had over all of these Middle Eastern nations over the last 30 or 40 years is starting to dissipate. Dr. Bob here, I'll comment to this. Turkey's not like a Western liberal democracy or anything like that. Yeah, Erdogan is despotic, right? He rules with an iron fist, but it's still styled after a European nation. It's has relations with the EU. It's part of NATO. That's what I mean when I say that. It's not. It isn't at least overtly Islamist, even though much of the population is. But let's let him keep going here.
It all depends. If you're talking about greater Israel, which is what I would talk about, because that is the fact on the ground that matters these days, it is not a democracy, because the Palestinians in the West Bank and the Palestinians in Gaza do not get to vote, but they are part of greater Israel. A more interesting question is whether or not Israel is a liberal democracy, like the United States or Britain or most European countries at this point in time. And Israel is clearly not a liberal democracy, because if it were liberal, it would have to have equal rights for all its members, and it does not have equal rights for the Palestinians, even for those Palestinians who have a right to vote. And this is why, of course, many people say that Israel is an apartheid state, but it's not a liberal democracy, and I don't believe it's much of a democracy.
Well, democracy not only means majority rule and the right to vote, it also means equal rights protected by the government. If I were to move to Jerusalem as an American Roman Catholic, could I buy real estate and could I register to vote?
I don't know. This involves technical laws that I'm not familiar with.
Okay.
The idea was to create a Jewish state, and it was a homeland for Jews. And most of the Zionist at the start, and even most of the Zionists now would prefer to have a state that's populated almost exclusively by Jews. I mean, this is why there's so much emphasis on ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians in both Gaza and the West Bank.
Why is Israel referred to as the state of Israel rather than the country or the nation of Israel?
Israel is in democracy based. Well, that's true.
It's not it's definitely not a liberal democracy.
Yeah.
But the thing about Israel is it teaches us that what if heritage Americans had people in power that looked out for their interests like the Israeli state looks out for Jewish people? I mean,
what would that look like?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be a liberal democracy. We wouldn't have like this universalist application of abstract laws applied to everybody around the world, and we wouldn't invite third worldists in to be under that sort of framework. We would distinguish between ourselves and our posterity and the other. I mean, that's one of the things that Israel does, and that's pretty based. So like, that to me is like, it stinks that we're having to fund this project of Israel's, but my complaint is not that it's not a liberal democracy.
Yeah, and this is where Napolitano and Mir Shimer, their liberalism shines through.
Yeah,
is their criticism of it is, oh, it's not a liberal, and I'm like, I don't care. They can rule however they want. They can have their own state however they want it to be. If they want to have a king, cool. If they whatever, I don't care about that. I think like Grey Duck, his point here, I'll assume it's a guy. Unironically, Israel is one of the few states in the Western world that still operates as a nation. Yeah, that's why these protesters hate Israel, right? Because it's follows this European model of a nation state, and unlike the occupied countries of Western Europe, they're allowed to do it. Right? France isn't allowed to do it. Germany's not allowed to do it.
Yeah.
Great Britain's not allowed to do it. Israel is. And that's
and this is what we on the right want for America, is we want us to look out for our interests, and we want to repudiate the Lizzo occupied government.
That's right. Well, let's let him continue out here.
I don't know. It's an interesting question, but
all right. Again, I might be delving too much into semantics. How effective is the Israel lobby in suppressing speech? Now, I'm asking in the U.S. I'm asking you this after 2 weeks of college students being arrested because they support the rights of the Palestinian people, and the House of Representatives threatening colleges and universities, and quite frankly, all educational institutions, if they say things or permit things to be said that can loosely be defined as anti-Semitic. How powerful is that lobby at suppressing free speech here in the U.S.?
Well, it's actually been wildly successful for decades. It's very hard to find anyone who would criticize Israel in the mainstream media, for example. And there were surveys that were done before October 7th, which showed that many academics self-censored when it came to Israel. If you were an academic and you were to criticize Israel or criticize the U.S.-Israeli relationship in a serious way, you would pay a significant price. There's just no question about that. Steve and I wrote the article in 2006 and the book in 2007, and we have lengthy discussions of all sorts of cases where people were punished one way or another in the academic world for criticizing Israel. And then if you go into the mainstream media, I mean, you were grabbing the third rail for sure. But what's happened here, Judge, is that as a result.
Well, just look at Candace Owens, for example, right? What was she fired over? It was over her criticism of Israel, right? It wasn't over being anti-Semitic or anything like that. It's that the Daily Wire says we're a pro-Israel company, and we'll let Matt Walsh, have a critique here or there. But overall, she opposes our views, our fundamental views, and that's what it was. And you see this everywhere else. And it's interesting. Like Tucker has been much more free to be critical of the Israelis. He's critical of this bill, and people lost their minds over that. Where he's like, they're banning the New Testament, right? And so yeah, you see that. Like, it's, what is it? The Voltaire quote, right? To find out who rules over you, just ask who you're not allowed to criticize. Right. And that's what you're not allowed to criticize Israel. Weird. I wonder if they have any power here. Right. Who doesn't have power, right? Is America this white supremacist state? Well, probably not, because you criticize white people as a people all day long. And not only will you face no consequences at all, you'll be promoted for doing such things, even if you're white, especially if you're white. And what Grey Ducks is not a Voltaire quote. Who is it? You know, CJ?
Well, it's just not an actual. I think it's attributed to Voltaire.
All right, it's kind of like, yeah, there's all of those kind of quotes. Well, we won't. I don't like Voltaire, so I won't reference him anymore. But let's
maybe we'll cite it as Grey Duck.
Yeah, we'll just say it's Grey Duck. That's right.
Of October 7th and what the Israelis have done in response to October 7th, all sorts of people are criticizing Israel. And given that we have social media, especially platforms like TikTok, Israel and the lobby and the U.S.-Israeli relationship are taking a beating. So what's happening is that the lobby is desperate to shut this down. These protests on campus just mortify people in the lobby. And the question is, how can they stop them? So tremendous pressure is being put on university administrators, university presidents in particular, and tremendous pressure is being put on the White House and on Congress to act to shut down the protests on campus. Look, just to give you two examples that highlight what's going on here. Was there any discussion of anti-Semitism on college and university campuses before October 7th? Was there a big uproar about anti-Semitism in academia before October 7th? The answer is no.
Right.
Yeah, this is a good comment from Big Tuna. Academics actually feel completely comfortable criticizing Israel because they're commies. Sounds like libtard whining for Mir Shimer. It's much harder to be critical of Israel as a right winger.
Yes.
That is 10 billion% true. Exactly. But now even leftoids are not allowed to criticize Israel, right? They're laying down the groundwork. You could be as woke as you want, just leave Israel out of it.
The second question I would ask you is, the president of Harvard and the president of the University of Pennsylvania have been pushed overboard, largely by rich donors who are joined at the hip with Israel. These are people who have a passionate attachment to Israel, who have interfered at Harvard and Penn to get these two women presidents fired. Do you think if October 7th had not happened, that these women would be in power now?
Well, of course they would.
Of course they would. They were thrown overboard, right? Because they didn't crack down on the protesters. And this is why the Columbia president is in trouble. It's why the Northwestern president is in trouble. The lobby desperately wants every president and every politician to crack down on the protesters. And automatically that takes us into freedom of speech territory.
I think it was James Vidair on Twitter who pointed out the fact that, yeah, the reason why all these high level academics are being shut down is because of the Israel lobby. Like, we still have a long way to go. Like, these people should not be in any position of authority based on the interest of heritage Americans, not the interest of Israel. So, like, it's important.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what I was alluding to at the beginning. Is like, yeah, we have this rise of like the middle American radicals, but at the same time, a lot of the dynamics that happen at the levels of power are two power centers that have nothing to do with our interests and our people. It's basically
whatsoever
Israel versus the third worldists. That's important to keep in mind. It is the liberal, it is the Israel lobby running things, but the alternative seems to be the third worldists and the leftists, the woke left, and not us.
Yeah, it's not any like pro-America group that has any say in any of this whatsoever, right? And like you said earlier, you have a handful of congressmen that see things that way. The rest are either Israel lobby or third worldists, right? Yeah. You either have Tim Scott or you have Ilhan Omar, right? Those are your options. Tim Scott. Who might be the vice president of the United States. Oh,
see, JD Vance. We should talk about that.
Yeah,
you want JD? JD Vance would be a good selection there.
He'd be phenomenal, but the problem is he's a phenomenal senator. All right, he's maybe the only U.S. senator. Oh, Rand Paul maybe too, but a handful of U.S. senators that are, pro-American first. Who else besides them? And so losing him in the Senate would be a blow.
I don't know. I think he could add an angle on Trump's policy agenda that would be important. That I don't know if anyone like Tim Scott, I think, would be like much worse than Pence.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, Pence was horrible. I mean, the thing is, the vice president doesn't do really all that much. And
no, he doesn't. But he can rally together, behind the scenes. I mean, that's what what's his name?
He's capable of doing a lot.
Dick Cheney.
And
Dick Cheney
yeah.
revolutionized, the vice presidency. So if
Oh,
people
yeah.
are, like aware of power dynamics, and JD
Mhm.
Vance is connected with the PayPal mafia, so there might be
Yeah.
something there. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, I hope it's him. I don't want him out of the Senate, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
All right.
Yeah. Let's go back.
Right.
And what's happening here very clearly is that the lobby is working overtime to undermine the First Amendment.
You are a professor at one of the great academic institutions in the United States, the University of Chicago, whose academic standards are superlative. What is the status of free speech, A, on that campus, your campus with students, and B, amongst academics?
Well, I would imagine that there's quite a bit of self-censorship here, as there is everywhere. But the University of Chicago has a rich tradition when it comes to freedom of speech, and it has a rich tradition when it comes to tolerating protest. And you remember surely that when this place blew up in 1969, the students took over the administration building. Ed Levy, who was then the president of the university, did not call in the police. At places like Harvard and Columbia, Columbia, of course, blew up in 68, and Harvard also blew up in 69. But the presidents of Harvard and Columbia did call in the police, and it backfired on them. But Levy, much to his credit, did not. He waited out the protesters, and then he eventually suspended them. And that was seen at the time as the smart thing to do. And I think if you had protests now and there was no lobby, these university presidents would just wait out the protesters. They would not call in the police, especially since the George Floyd affair took place not that long ago. You remember, the idea of calling in the police was unthinkable in the wake of the whole George Floyd fiasco.
Right.
Well, here we are, not long after that, calling in the police. Why has this happened? And the answer is the power of the lobby.
Here's Max Blumenthal, one of your colleagues on the show, happens to be a big fan of yours, describing his fears about all of this.
Yeah, the one thing that really concerns me because of what we saw in 2020 with BLM, with the Proud Boys, that there are elements in the national security state and the political elite that actually want to see a strategy of tension, that want to see violent chaos, political chaos play out in the streets. And that's what kind of concerns me going forward in the election, is that they actually could try to play this to their benefit.
Might Max be onto something? Might the lobby actually feel that it could benefit from chaos and conflagrations, and therefore, in the minds of the public, more justifiably, the use of police force?
I think that the lobby understands that the more this spins out of control, the more you go down the road that Max is describing, the bigger the problem for Israel. And the reason is that people who are sitting on the fence will come off the fence and side with the protesters. I had a good friend who was at Harvard in 1969, and he said the radicals actually had very little support when the protests first started and they took over the administration building. But once the police were called in, the end result is that many sort of middle of the road students who were not committed one way or the other sided with the protesters. So I think you have a situation here where if what Max describes happens, and he may be correct about where this one is headed, and the police continue to crack down on protesters, and we have a giant fiasco here in Chicago at the Democratic National Convention, that what this will do is it will drive people away from the Israeli side of the story, and it will cause great sympathy on the Palestinian side. So I think.
You think that's true, CJ? I have my doubts.
I actually think that people are fed up with like rioting and protests and stuff, and they want to see some skulls cracked. Actually,
yeah, I think
it's like the OJ thing, like like in the LA riots. I think people mostly cheered on the police force, and I don't think they're buying into the George Floyd stuff anymore.
No, I think I think people understand that crime is rampant and that you have Soros DEAs all over the country who are letting people who commit murder and all sorts of violent crime, just giving them slaps on the wrist.
I think law and order is a winning issue. And I think
Yeah.
people are sick of being basically the whole world being a theater for these protesters and the Lizzos of the world to have their way with America. I think they're sick of it.
Yeah. I think Mearsheimer is just incorrect here. That maybe in the 60s, that rationale worked because that's not a thing anyone had ever experienced before in the same way. I mean, there have been riots and demonstrations and stuff in the past in America, but you have this visceral image of just these college kids who are peaceful hippies or whatever, getting their skulls cracked by the cops. Here, right. Yeah. People are sick of these people. Right. Yeah. And you see that with the Frat Boys, right? Everyone's cheering them. Like the ones that held up the flag in UNC, they raised $400,000 in like a day to throw a big kegger. right? Like that is that people are sick of him. And
Is that
so
the one that
I think he's
Bill
wrong.
Ackman threw in a $10,000? Was
I
that
saw
one?
that. I saw that. I mean, that, yeah, get going with the Israel lobby there. But no, I think it's just the opposite, right? I think
Yeah,
if people see
I
the
agree.
cops go in and deal with these people, which, that's what happened at UCLA, right? The cops came in the middle of the night, cleared the whole thing out, and then the next day, all you see is trash everywhere,
Mhm.
right? And these they're so repulsive. That's the thing, but they're not appealing to normal people in any way at all. These are the people that stop traffic on the Golden Gate Bridge and wreck they did the same thing in Detroit, right?
Yeah.
It's yeah, exactly. Tim's right. It's 60s leftist mythology.
And he says normal people were all against the protests of the 60s, highly
Yes.
unpopular, but the elites were for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is how Nixon got elected.
Yeah.
Right? Because the silent majority said, we're sick of this stuff so much.
I don't know if you watched
Not
the
yet.
conversation I had. So yeah, he talks about the fact that this is exactly why Nixon was so popular.
Yeah. And you see it with a certain guy who's very similar to Nixon in many ways, Donald Trump, where it's like, got to deal with the protester. You got to deal with this, law and order.
Donald Trump, 3-time winner of the presidential election.
That's right. But yeah, that's what this stuff is people are sick of this stuff, and you send in the cops, and people are gonna cheer it on, and not even silently like they maybe would in the past. Like,
Right.
good, deal with these people, they're awful. And whether it's like normie evangelicals who are pro-Zionist or whatever, cheering it on, or it's just largely apolitical Americans, right? Barstool sports people. They don't really care about anything other than the big game. They like seeing this stuff. And so, no, I think Mearsheimer's totally wrong here. The more I think about it,
I think the lobby, if anything, is wishing that this one will go away. But of course, it's not going to go away.
Here's a cut number 9, Chris. Here is a Columbia University professor of whom I have never heard. I don't know if you know her, Rebecca Weiner. This professor was outed. I'll tell you how she was outed after we listen to her, but let's listen to what she had to say about peaceful protest on the Columbia campus.
This is not about students expressing ideas. It is about a change in tactics that presents a concern and a normalization and mainstreaming of rhetoric. And I'm not just talking about language, I'm now talking about tactics. And that's what shifted our response yesterday. But a normalization and mainstreaming of rhetoric associated with terrorism that has now become pretty common on college campuses, right? You see people wearing headbands associated with foreign terrorist organizations. This happened in October when you had a viral TikTok reissuing of Osama bin Laden's 2002 letter to America. So that's a larger concern. It's separate from what happened yesterday, but they're related. We do not want ideas. We do not want campuses which are where people are supposed to be.
It's our eyes.
Being a conducive environment for all of the things that we do in schools, being turned into places where people are committing vandalism, property damage, and committing crimes.
She had finished her statement. We do not want ideas that we disagree with. Now, I doubt that she's going to be back at Columbia, because it turns out that she's an undercover police officer who was teaching at Columbia and who hung out with a lot of the demonstrators and reported on them. So I'd imagine she's no longer welcome there, but she's part of the problem of equating legitimate political speech. We think the
intel agencies, I mean, the local police force, but the NYPD is as big as the FBI, infiltrating dissident groups. Who could see that coming? Interesting.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Palestinians have the right to a government. We think that the IDF is committing genocide. Perfectly legitimate political statements. She's equating that with violence.
Exactly. I mean, what she represents is a fundamental threat to academia and to the United States at large, the broader society. I mean, it's just a terrible situation that we're in. What she's trying to do is talk about tactics that these protesters are using that are so dangerous. What kind of threats do we see that are so dangerous on college campuses? Yes, at one or two places, the students have taken over the administration building or a different building. This happened in the late 1960s. It's not that big a deal. Those students should be punished for taking over a building, okay. But the talk, I mean, the idea that these students are terrorists, and you noticed how she linked them with terrorists, is just nonsense.
She said they were terrorists because they wore...
Taking over a building is not a big deal. I mean, yeah. I agree. Let's apply that same logic to, epiphany of 2021, right?
Yeah.
Just taking over administration building, man. That's all you're doing. Right? Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's a lot of power in
how's-
symbology. Like
oh yeah,
this is you have to interpret this politically, not just like
Yeah.
within a contextless vacuum.
yeah.
It's significant. They need
But
to
this,
be
I mean,
crushed.
this is what the regime does generally, and it's not just because of these, filthy commies. They want to equate speech with terrorism, right? That's what they stochastic terrorism. That's what you're doing, right? So stuff that we say, even though, again, always peaceful and nonviolent as we always are, they call it stochastic terrorism or whatever. Like that's their terminology, where it's like speech is violence, and that's how they shut down things they don't want to be said.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Palestinian headbands and replayed a speech by Osama bin Laden.
This is crazy. You're allowed to do that. People can sympathize with Hamas. I understand why many Americans, including many American Jews for sure, do not like to hear that kind of rhetoric. They don't
Right.
like to hear people sympathizing with Hamas. But this is the United States of America, and you're allowed to say that you sympathize with Hamas, and you're allowed to say that you sympathize with what the IDF is doing in Gaza. That's what freedom of speech is all about. But again, the thing you have to understand, Judge, is that once you open up these debates and allow people to say what they want, this does enormous damage to Israel's image in the United States. It does enormous damage to the lobby and to the U.S.-Israeli relationship, and they don't want that.
Going to play you a clip from another fan of yours, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, in which he expressed an opinion as to what is the principal cause. This takes us back to where we started our conversation of anti-Semitism in America today. I don't know how he lives with himself, Colonel.
I don't either. He is the living manifestation on earth today of what causes anti-Semitism. Those are the words of a rabbi who's been my friend for a long time. His exact words were, the greatest motivator for anti-Semitism in the world today is Bibi Netanyahu.
What do you think?
Well, I would just say, I don't think we have an anti-Semitism problem in the United States. And that's the good news.
That that is good news, but the Republicans in the House of Representatives and the Israeli lobby want us to think that we do, and that it's so
I agree with
bad
that.
we have to tamper with the First Amendment.
I agree.
What? Elaborate.
I don't think we have an anti-Semitism problem.
Yeah.
I think it's
No.
a complete construct to set up the parameters of debate. And I agree with that for sure.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think he's right.
This is why, like, even those on the right, even those like within our circles who are uncomfortable with the way things are going, especially the anti-white rhetoric in America, I think they're completely wrong-headed to attribute this to like an anti-Semitism or something like that. I think it's ridiculous. I don't think there's any visible threat of anything nearing what could be considered like power dynamics based on anti-Semitism.
No, certainly not. And again, I just go back to the fact that, I mean, and Mearsheimer brought this up, that a significant number of the people in these protests, funding the protests, organizing the protests, are themselves Jews, right? I remember the very first large protest after Israel's offensive began in Gaza was organized by a bunch of rabbis and they sat in and took over the Capitol Rotunda in DC. I guess they're allowed to do that. And it's like these, and they're wearing all their garb, and they're Jews against Israel. I think that was the name of the organization even. And it's like, it's not driven by anti-Semitism. It's not driven by hatred of Jews. It's so preposterous to think that. But it's the talking point, because you're allowed to use that terminology, right? You're using Civil Rights Act language, right? That within that framework, that this is bad because they're targeting Jews, right? And we can criticize it now for that reason. But in the reality, it's nothing to do with any of those things at all, right? And this is a point I made the other day when you weren't here, is if someone who is, say like Nick Fuentes, right? That's the big figure everyone says is anti-Semitic, right? For sake of argument, grant that's true, right? If he went to Columbia University or UCLA or to any one of these other protests and said, "Hey guys, I'm on your side. I hate Israel too. It's horrible," right? They would immediately denounce him and start beating him up and getting him out of there, right? They want nothing to do with anyone on the right that would be critical of Jews, right? So it's not it has, there's no connection there whatsoever, right? And so it really bothers me, yeah, when people in our side of things get this so wrong, because
Mhm.
they don't have a clue what's going on.
Mhm.
So, all right, let's keep going.
But that's simply because they're interested in shutting down criticism of Israel. Look, Israel is in the process of executing a genocide. This is an apartheid state that is executing a genocide. Is it any surprise that lots of students who have access to platforms like TikTok and understand what is going on are out protesting? It's hardly surprising at all. But this is not anti-Semitism. And again, many of the protesters are Jews, and many people who are sympathetic to the protesters are Jews. So the idea that this is sort of like Weimar Germany or even Nazi Germany is just not a serious argument. Again, before October 7th, did you hear people at universities talking about rabid anti-Semitism on campuses across the country? Of course not. Was Claudine Gay, the president of Harvard, being portrayed as an anti-Semite? No, nobody even mentioned that possibility. This is all happening in the wake of October 7th, and it has to do with the fact that Israel is in deep trouble, and more people recognize that Israel is in deep trouble, and it is doing absolutely horrible things to the Palestinians. That's what's going on here.
What do you think will happen if the IDF invades Rafah and slaughters another 35,000 people?
Let's pause there for a second. Do you agree that Israel's in deep trouble, CJ?
No.
I don't either. I don't think they are. Because
well, I mean, I think that there is a like sort of the BRICS concept, right? The alternative to NATO. You know, there is some sort of like counter, coordination in countries that are interested in helping Israel anymore. And I think Israel needs the Anglo-American dominance to have its way in the West. And I think the more that America loses its power, the more Israel is going to have to respond to those changing dynamics. I don't think there's any immediate threat, but they're losing their hegemony for sure.
Yeah, I think like Scott McLaughlin's comment here, read more, ports all over the world are closed to Israeli ships. Like, I think in like geopolitical terms, and of course that's Mearsheimer's forte, so maybe he's thinking about it in those terms. Yeah, they are in some trouble, right? So I agree along those lines. The thing where I disagree is within the context of American politics. That you can have all of these protests. You can have, 20% of the left or of Democratic voters that are pro-Palestinian and very angry. You can have them, freak out like they're doing, and that's not going to affect the politicians really at all, right? Because they don't really care about the people or what the people are saying. They care about the donors and who, like, 60% of the funding, like Ron brought up this point, and he's keyed into these things. 60% of the funding of the Democratic Party comes from pro-Zionist Jews, right? And so that's why you have this bill passing Congress with broad, widespread bipartisan support, right? Why is that? Right? Whenever you hear bipartisan, usually you get like beneath that rock is Israel, right? That's the thing they all agree on is got to support Israel, right?
Yeah.
Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell, Mike Johnson, they all agree that they're locked hand in hand, arm in arm, defending Israel, right? And the reason why has nothing to do with what the public thinks, right? 80% of the public could be saying, it could either be overtly pro-Palestinian or indifferent and not wanting American money and involvement in this place and be against it, and they would still vote the same way that they do. They would still support all the same policies they do. So in terms of like the American politics on the ground here, Israel being in trouble, I don't think they are, but geopolitically is a totally other thing. And so that's much longer term. That's more the power of the United States is starting to wane in certain ways, that other countries are no longer under the thumb as much of the United States. And Israel will face backlash, like, not being allowed to trade with certain countries or various monetary problems as well. So we'll see what we'll let him get into that.
The protests will be even greater then than they are now. I mean, the idea that they're going to shut down these protests by bringing in the police is not a serious argument. This is what Edward Levy figured out in 1968, 69, that bringing in the police does not help. You can't shut these problems down by beating up protesters or trying to throw them in jail if they criticize Israel. The only
we don't know that.
Well, Bukele would disagree.
Yeah, that's right. I think he would. This is an interesting comment. I think we should address this. Do you think it is a legitimate concern that the blood libel clause could be weaponized against churches, or is that hyperbole? I don't. It's a good question. I mean, I think if the bill itself, I mean, it's about federal funding, right? So there are not very many churches that receive federal funding. Now, maybe like all of the liberal mainline churches, they
who are supporting this anyways.
Well, they're subsidized by the federal government. Like, how much of the budget of the ELCA, right? The lady pastor down the street of your ELCA church, right? How's their salary paid? Some of it's by the old people that have been in the church for 5 generations and don't know anything better. But some of it is because Lutheran Social Services is helping facilitate the importation of millions of third world people, and they get a big kickback for that. Yeah. But these are also the people like these, in these far left mainline churches that are like pro-Palestinian. So maybe there could be a backlash to that, but like conservative evangelical churches, I don't think there would be at all. If we still can have our Good Friday service and read from the Gospel of John, right? I don't think that's going to affect us.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll continue on here.
The way you can solve these problems is by actually solving the problem that's driving the train. And that means putting an end to the Vietnam War. And in this case, it's fundamentally changing what Israel is doing in Gaza. If the Israelis stopped all the killing and went to some lengths to give the Palestinians a decent life, the protests would die, or at least they would be greatly reduced. But what's going to happen here in all likelihood, if you listen and believe Netanyahu, is that they're going to go into Rafah and they're going to end up killing many more civilians and maybe even driving some of the Palestinians into Egypt. And this is going to cause huge trouble. The protests are going to grow. But beating up on the protesters or robbing them of their First Right amendments is certainly not the solution here.
Is Israel an ally of the United States?
No, not in any meaningful way. I mean, people in lobby and defend.
This is really good.
Yeah.
This is really, really good.
Defenders of Israel like to make the argument that it's a strategic asset. It's not a strategic asset. It's a strategic liability. It's an albatross around their neck, as I've said on numerous occasions. And from an ethical or moral point of view, everything that it's doing is abhorrent from the perspective of American values. I mean, we're supposed to be enthusiastic about supporting an apartheid state. We're supposed to be enthusiastic about supporting genocide in Gaza. Of course not. So the idea that this is a close relationship, that we have this special relationship with Israel, that we give it unconditional aid because it's a strategic asset and it's the morally correct thing to do is not a serious argument. What we are doing is driven in large part by Israel's supporters who work overtime, who are relentless.
Well, and the other point here is that the rest of the Middle Eastern world is anti-Israeli, certainly the population, maybe not their governments, and all this relationship the United States has with Israel. All it does is cause all sorts of messes for the United States in that region of the world. Right. That's the main argument is what exactly is the strategic benefit? I mean, in the past, people have said, well, you have the Suez Canal and that is and having that asset there, right, having an aligned state near that strategic point is very important. So like granting that. But look what's happening with the Houthis. Right. The Suez Canal traffic is still at 50% of its normal capacity, right? Because they're going around Africa now, all the container ships to avoid Yemen. Mm-hmm. And so the strategic asset, if that's the rationale, protecting the Suez Canal, well, it's now a liability. And so I don't know how you can make any realistic argument that it's an asset to the United States and our position in the world and so forth, right? I mean, that would be like if you're going to try to persuade me as an American of why do we need to be sending billions of dollars to Israel all the time, right? I'm not obviously going to be persuaded by theological arguments or things like that, or by the moral argument. But we have a duty to support Jews. They're being attacked by Muslims. Like, I'm not going to buy into those things. But maybe I would be convinced if there was some strategic necessity why you have to have an alliance with that particular country, where it would be good for our people, right? It's good for us because we need a lot of trade to go through. All the oil is going through the Suez Canal, and we need protection there. I could maybe buy that, but that doesn't seem to be true at all. So we'll let
this in their efforts to
Dr.
get the
Mearsheimer
United
go.
States to support Israel no matter what.
And who have caused this mantra, Israel is our closest ally, to be spread and articulated amongst members of Congress and in the government of both parties and all ideologies.
Of course, there's a whole slew of mantras that these Congress people and people in the White House spew so that they get support from the lobby, and at least the lobby doesn't go after them and try to defeat them in the next election. I mean, this is the problem that President Biden faces, right? He's up for re-election in November, and he knows full well that if he's critical of Israel or he threatens to cut off aid to Israel, that the end result will be that he'll lose for sure in the fall. I mean, he might lose anyway, especially where these protests are going. But if he crosses Israel or crosses the lobby, they will take revenge on him. This is just the way it works.
Yeah.
Here's a former president of the United States, no longer living, shortly after he left the White House, talking about what he views as the proper relationship between American Jews and Israel and the United States.
Let me explain something about what is called.
We've all seen this clip. Yeah.
In the first place, Jews, understandably, in the United States, because of what happened in World War II, because of the Holocaust, are going to put first priority on the survival of Israel. Now, as good Americans as they are, they believe that America's survival and security is directly related to Israel's. In other words, their belief is that being or Israel first means that does not mean you're putting America second, because they think it goes together. An American president, however, has to approach it in a different way, in my opinion. He's got always to think first of what is best for America. And that's true whether it has to do with the Israelis or whether it has to do with the Irish or the Germans.
It used to be the case, maybe.
Yeah. Wow.
Not anymore. Not even close.
Germans or what have you, or the Poles, etc. Usually what is best for America is also best for Israel and vice versa. But on occasions, for example, an American president must make a decision that does not in effect give the Israelis a blank check. And one example of that is a decision that I made. I decided early on in our administration that we were going to seek good relations with Egypt and others of Israel's neighbors. Many of my Israeli friends didn't like that because they wanted a special relationship with Israel and Israel only. But I've always said that Israel's interests are better served to have the United States a friend of Israel's neighbors and potential enemies than to leave a vacuum which the Soviet Union would fill.
What do you think?
I agree with everything he said, except I wouldn't call it the Jewish lobby. I would call it the Israel lobby, because not all Jews are in the lobby, and there are Christian Zionists and others in the lobby who contribute to its influence. But otherwise, his arguments are on the money. He pointed out that what Israel supporters like to do is conflate America's interests with Israel's interests and say there's no difference between the two. And Nixon says quite correctly that you can't do that. They may be the same interests a lot of the time, but not all the time. And when the United States and Israel have different interests, President Nixon, is going to favor American interests for all the obvious reasons. But again, most of Israel's supporters believe there's no difference between the two countries' interests. Now, what's different from Nixon's situation and the present situation is the lobby was nowhere near as powerful when Nixon was president as it is today. The lobby has grown really powerful. It is remarkably powerful today. And it has to be remarkably powerful today because the task of defending Israel has become much more complicated, much more difficult than it was in Nixon's time. And I think Dick Nixon was in a position where he could challenge the lobby in ways that no president could today.
Are there Christians?
Well, it's interesting too. What happened to Nixon? You already talked about that today, CJ.
Yes. We should have it. We'll have a Nixon program soon.
We should have one just dedicated to the best president of the 20th century. But no, I mean, I think Mearsheimer is correct. And looking at why is the situation more complicated now for the Israel lobby than it has been in the past? Well, it's because for the last 40 years, the American regime has actively imported millions of foreign people, right, especially from the third world. And now you can have a congresswoman in my state, who is elected by her people that populate her district that are not Americans and are completely impervious to the Israel lobby entirely. And she serves in Congress. Same thing with Michigan and Rashida Tlaib, or however you say her name. We should give her a anglicized name for reference. But you have these. They've imported these people here, and now they're anti-Israel, and they don't know what to do with it. Like it's really remarkable, right?
It is. It's ironic. What it
the
is.
problem, yeah, it's very ironic, and the problem is, right, within that whole equation, there is no American people being represented in that. It's either, like you said, Israel lobby or third worldists.
Yeah.
Right. That's it. There's no what's best for America. There's no President Nixon saying American president has to do what's best for the American people. There's nobody here doing that. Right? There's nobody here saying that at all. Maybe Trump, but even he goes and kisses the wall. He's got Jared Kushner as a son-in-law.
I don't think Trump's that good on Israel, to be honest.
No,
I would trust people like I would trust JD Vance or Thomas Massey or someone like that on Israel.
And Massey has paid a price. Like they want to unseat him, get rid of him, and he hasn't. All he's done is I'm representing the people of Kentucky, right? Yeah. This doesn't help us at all to send billions of dollars to Israel. We should try to bring about a peaceful resolution to this conflict. And they attack him. They want to destroy him. They want to get rid of him because what's he advancing? The interests of his actual constituents. Mm-hmm. And very, very, very few people like that at all representing the American people. So let's. He's asking a question. This is very pertinent to us. The next question
is in the lobby. Are there such things as Christian Zionists, say like Speaker of the House Mike Johnson?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. There have been a number of American Jewish supporters of Israel who are disgusted with the fact that many American Jews are critical of Israel. And they say that the Christian Zionists are Israel's firmest supporters or best or strongest supporters. These are American Jews. I've heard say this over the years. So the Christian Zionists matter. But of course, I think the core of the lobby are American Jews. But again, I want to emphasize not all American Jews by any means.
Before we go, let's get back to where we started, the freedom of speech. It's the first week in May. It's either exam time or graduation time at nearly every major university in the country. Where do you see this going? Does it die down in a couple of weeks? Do these young people coalesce in the tens or hundreds of thousands in Chicago this summer, where as ironic as can be, the Democratic National Convention will be just as it was in 19...
Yeah, I made this point on Twitter. Like, I think it's going to go down at the DNC this year. Right.
Really?
It's in Chicago. Like it's going to happen. Like that. It's going to be wild. Right. Especially because like Napolitano was saying, it's finals week or graduation week. Everyone's going to leave campus and the people are just not even going to be there to do these protests. Yeah. Great road trip. Yeah. Do I want to make the 8-hour drive to Chicago? I don't make a habit of going to Chicago if I can help it. And I certainly, it would be a really fun live stream to be down there and seeing all of it. You want to fly into O'Hare, CJ, and hang out with me in Chicago for?
Yeah, no, I hate Chicago.
It is the worst. It is terrible. Let's finish this up. He's almost done here.
68. Does it bubble up again in September if the IDF is still slaughtering innocents? What's your feel for this, Professor Mearsheimer?
Well, I think that it'll be very interesting to see what happens at graduation at the various universities and colleges across the country where this is an issue. The University of Southern California, which has behaved in abhorrent ways on this whole issue, has canceled commencement. And that may happen at other schools. If it's not canceled, my guess is there'll be lots of protests at different graduation ceremonies around the country. But then school summer break occurs. And the question is, what happens over the summer? I think the big question will be what happens at the Democratic National Convention. It's hard for me to imagine that there's not going to be significant protest. Are they going to do that convention virtually? Is that going to be the road they go down? If they don't, I keep thinking of Chicago in 1968, and what will 2024 Chicago look like for the DNC? And it might not be pretty. But then school will start up again, and I think what it looks like when school starts up is all a function of what the Israelis are up to. And I believe that there is little chance. I hope I'm wrong. There's little chance that the Israelis will do much of anything to improve the Palestinians' lot in Gaza or in the West Bank. And therefore, the protests will start back up again next fall. And university administrators will have a whole year in front of them trying to deal with protesters. And there'll be enormous pressure on them then, as there is now, from supporters of Israel, especially supporters who have big checkbooks. And those university presidents will be under tremendous pressure to crack down. And should they crack down, as I said before, I don't think that will work to their advantage, to the advantage of the university presidents or to the advantage of the lobby.
Professor Mearsheimer, thank you very much, my dear friend. Next week, I'm giving a lecture at the University of Milan. So I'll be traveling. We'll see you in 2 weeks. My lecture is called Taking Rights Seriously.
Okay. Well, what do you think, CJ, about the whole dynamic as a whole, right? The protests, everything else.
I mean, let me just comment on the video. I actually disagreed more with Mearsheimer than I thought I was going to.
Yeah.
Because he's really good on the problems of, in terms of, political realism, foreign policy realism with Israel. Yeah. But yeah, the entire framing of his domestic policy is very leftist. He's got no problems with third worldism. Basically, like he has no problems with immigration stuff and civil rights stuff that I think are very core. See, this, what happens is we have this regime that is very left-wing on domestic issues and very neoconservative on foreign policy issues. So we have this mixture of the worst of both worlds. What we need is that old realism in foreign policy and a realism on domestic policy, a realism that doesn't cling to like these propositional ideals and abstract, ideals in order to make domestic policy, but really on both foreign and domestic issues, we need to think what is good for the continuity and preservation of the American way of life and the American people that make up this nation.
Yeah. Yeah. And neither of those things are represented here. I mean, I think about it in terms of if the Israel lobby is damaged in the United States, that's probably, with some hesitations here, maybe some nuance. That is, I use the N-word, nuance. That's probably good, right? If they get knocked down a couple pegs. But the problem is the instrument to do it is way worse, right? Yeah. You would ideally, what you would want is the Israel lobby to be knocked down several pegs by a resurgent rightism that says we want America first, not Israel first. And that is starting to grow and coalesce to a much larger degree than it was even 4 years ago and certainly 8 years ago. But that's not the instrument that is, that's driving these things. Yeah, go ahead with this one, William McKinley.
So I actually don't know a ton about McKinley, but I'm in the process, like so many others on the right, of becoming polk-pilled. And so I was very much like a John Tyler guy because he was like a strict constructionist on the Constitution. But there's this ethos that came out of the, post-Civil War. And I guess Polk was not post-Civil War, but like McKinley, this what is good for America, not imperial America. So that makes me uncomfortable with McKinley thing. But yeah, we need to do what's best for us. We need to react realistically to changing dynamics in the world. So if I'm to be McKinley, pilled, I would love to read Big Tuna's piece.
Well, yeah, I think, in terms of McKinley, it's that the genie's out of the bottle as far as American empire, right? I don't think we're going to be able to go back to Polk era, very limited America where it's just
actually no. I'm gonna make a case for a new Polkism in a coming essay. It's a part 2 for the one I'm writing for American Reformer. Okay. So I'm gonna make a case that there is an element of Polk that is necessary, and it's not actually, what's the word? It's not. We're not gonna
it's not anachronistic or.
Well, no. What I want to say is it's not like being a pro-constitutionalist in an age when the Constitution has been liquidated is kind of
Oh
silly.
yeah.
And I don't think that's a Polk's policy at all.
No. I think this is a good question as we wrap up here. Orrin McIntyre's take: "Let them fight." Right? What do you think about that?
That's my impulse. That's my
Yeah,
impulse.
more or less, it's mine too. I see, like, Orrin, tweeted today that the frat boys are giving the left the enemy that they want, where you can have the Israel lobby and the Marxoids join forces against the good-looking young frat boys, where it's like, oh, see, our enemy is whiteness, and they're embodying that, right? And I get that. I get that he sees that, but part of me is like, so what? Right? Fine. They already know that we are the enemy, right? And the only way our people begin to stand up, heritage Americans be able to stand up for themselves, is when they recognize that they are the enemy of both sides. And on one hand, maybe push the antithesis, right? Let them attack you and fight and try to destroy you, because only then are your people beginning to stand up. Like, none of these guys cared until they went after the American flag and started taking the American flags down and putting up Palestinian flags, right? They were indifferent to the entire, just like we are. It's like, not my circus, not my monkeys on either side of this, and let them fight, right? Let them, take the administration buildings over and scuffle with the cops and all of this stuff all summer long. Let them do it. Yeah. I mean, so on that end, I'm like, let the internecine left-wing fight continue on. So instead of heritage American, how about Native American? Well, that's like the Bill the Butcher gangs of New York thing, right? And that's like the know nothings in the mid 19th century, right?
Yeah.
That they called themselves Native Americans, and so we could try to take over that term. I don't know how successful we'll be.
Heritage.
Yeah, no, it is. It's I think it's way better, but yeah, it goes back to Henry Kissinger, right? It's a pity that both sides can't lose, right? That's how I look at it.
Let me post this. I actually agree with this. People think it's like a racist, like signaling or something.
Yeah, you're dog whistling, CJ.
No, I think that, like, the Cherokees and the Iroquois, that's part of the drama, that's part of the mosaic that animated American life in the colonial period. So, like, yeah, of course they're included. Like, if you look at the blacks as portrayed in the Gone with the Wind, they're absolutely part of heritage America. Yeah. But it was dominated by European institutions and European principles and stuff like that. I mean, the blacks and the Native Americans really had to be integrated into that world, and they did have a lesser status. So we, European derived people set up the country. We made it a nation. Before it was just a continent. We settled it. We made it something worth preserving. So it is definitely a European source domination of American heritage, but the Native Americans and the original, like the children, not like the new blacks. Flannery O'Connor distinguished between the old blacks and the new blacks, but there is this, like, the inheritors, like, I'm thinking of, what's the guy's name up from Booker T. Washington.
Yeah.
Like, that whole mentality is definitely part of our ethos. And that's part of Heritage America too.
Yeah. And I mean, this is the thing. I think I mentioned this with Ron in the last one, that it isn't, when we talk about these things, it's not like a racial essentialist thing, right? People are always like, these guys must be Wignats or something. It's like, no,
it's not racially essentialist, but it's ethnically relevant.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and that's the mistake a lot of people make, where you're like, no, you have nations, and there's an ethnic component to nations. This is what Stephen Wolfe talks about in his book, but it's not a one-to-one thing. It's not, all right, here's the ethnicity, and that's the bounds of what the nation is. But it's not irrelevant either. It's not a propositional nationhood, right?
It's connected. There's a correspondence there for sure.
Yeah. And so, and we're so race brained, and civil rights brained, that we're terrified to talk in those terms ever and be frank about these things, right? We can't ever talk about that stuff because that's racist, right? Yeah. And so then you then your only option is, well, propositional nationhood, magic dirt, all of that kind of stuff. And that's just lunacy.
Yeah. Look at this guy. Big Tuna is starting to fight with you. The Germans,
I'm going back.
Germans, yeah, the Germans preceded Ellis Island. They can stay.
We did.
Anyways, I don't want to
actually. Yeah. Well, my parents are in Germany right now, and back in our ancestral villages, and they're loving it there. So, but I don't know. Every picture they send me, there's people with hijabs in the background all over. So,
yeah.
If they send them back first, I'd be willing to maybe go back. We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. But yeah, that's really all we got for this week. Next week, are we able to announce our guests for next week?
I need to solidify. Let me solidify it because I know there's a lot of Steve Saylor. Well,
he's not next week. He's coming up this month, but
no, let's not talk about the next week one because he has to confirm.
Yeah, we got to confirm with our next week's guest, special guest. We'll let you know when we can, and we should be recording with Paul fairly soon as well. That'll be our special monthly subscriber guest. So go to contramundumpodcast.com to sign up and get access to that live stream. And we're going to have unfortunately no time for We're All Gonna Make It. I did message him and say, hey, come on today, but sorry, not enough time for you. And yeah, so we have that special guest coming with Dr. Gottfried, and the Martyr Made one. I'm going to release a clip once I have some time to do it. We'll put a 10 or 15 minute clip out there on the channel for people to have a sneak preview of that one as well and see how awesome the conversation was that we had with Daryl and with Ron. And anything else, any articles coming up, any more Chronicle stuff? You mentioned the Chronicles one from today that everyone should watch.
Yeah, I had a good conversation with Jeff Shepard about Nixon and Watergate and the conspiracy against Nixon and how much it parallels and precedes, sets up what happened with Trump. So anyways, you can go watch that. And I should have an article next week up on American Reformer. It'll be my first essay on American Reformer, so that'll be a good one. I take a lot of the themes we talked about here, so I'm excited.
Hitting the big time with I think the most reputable Protestant academic journal in America, American Reformer. Unlike others, we'll just say. Unlike others.
I got to run though.
So. All right. Well, thank you all for watching. Please like, subscribe, go to contramundumpodcast.com and sign up there. We appreciate all the support that everyone's giving. Thank you for the chat, all the great comments that you all have every week. And until next time, please stay peacefully dangerous, and we will see you next time.